the train that never arrived. It departed on time. It never arrived. On an ordinary morning, beneath a sky untouched by storm or shadow, the train rolled out of the station exactly as scheduled. Its destination was familiar. Its route, routine. Nothing about that journey suggested history was about to fracture. 300 passengers boarded that day. Commuters clutching coffee cups. Families returning home. Strangers sharing brief glances before retreating into their own quiet worlds. The doors closed. The whistle sounded. The wheels turned. And just like that, the train disappeared into motion. At first, no one noticed anything was wrong. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, calm air, visibility stretching for miles. There were no warnings, no alerts, no sense of danger lurking ahead. Signals along the track confirmed its progress, each checkpoint reporting exactly what it should. Speed steady, systems normal, nothing out of place. Then, somewhere between departure and destination, everything stopped. The final signal came from a tunnel deep along the route, a routine transmission unremarkable in every way. Seconds later, silence followed. Not the kind caused by static or delay, but a complete absence. No distress call, no emergency brake warning, no indication of failure, just nothing. By the time officials realized the train was overdue, the clock had already begun counting something far more unsettling than minutes. Search crews were dispatched. Rail traffic was halted. Emergency systems activated. Every protocol designed for disaster was put into motion. But there was no disaster to find. No wreckage, no damaged tracks, no sign that a train carrying 300 people had ever passed through at all. The rails led into the tunnel and emerged empty on the other side. What vanished that day was more than steel and passengers. It was certainty, logic, the belief that things which depart must eventually arrive. Because the tracks did not break, they simply continued, without the train that was supposed to be on them. The departure. The station woke slowly that morning, as it always did. At first, it was only sound, the distant hum of electricity running through overhead lines, the low murmur of announcements echoing off tiled walls, the rhythmic clack of footsteps crossing the concourse. Then came movement. Vendors lifting metal shutters, porters adjusting their uniforms, commuters emerging from stairwells like clockwork, drawn by habit more than intention. Nothing about the day suggested it would be remembered. The train stood motionless at platform 4, its steel body catching the pale morning light. Clean, intact, ordinary. It was not a long-distance express or a luxury liner meant to impress. It was a short-haul passenger train, one that ran this route several times a day, every day, year after year. Its journey was so familiar that most passengers barely noticed the destination on the digital board. Departure time, 087, on time, as always. The driver arrived 15 minutes early. He had been operating trains for nearly 2 decades, long enough to trust routine more than instinct. He walked the length of the platform with practiced steps, performing checks he could have done blindfolded. Wheels, couplings, doors. Systems green across the board. No anomalies. Inside the control cabin, displays glowed softly. Speed indicators rested at 0. Signal status read clear. Weather data streamed in from external sensors. Calm winds, mild temperature, no precipitation. It was, by all measurable standards, a perfect morning to travel. Behind him, the first passengers began boarding. They came in quiet waves, not rushed, not anxious. Office workers with pressed shirts and tired eyes, students with headphones already in place, sealing themselves off from the world. Elderly couples walking side by side, moving slowly but confidently, as though this train were an extension of their home. A mother lifted her sleeping child into an empty seat near the window. A man folded his newspaper with careful precision before sitting down. 2 friends laughed softly, their conversation trailing off as they checked their phones. 300 people, each carrying a private destination inside them, stepped onto the same train without realizing how fragile that shared moment truly was. At 8:10, the doors closed for the first time, not to depart, but to test. A mechanical sigh followed by a gentle thud. Perfect seal. The doors reopened, and a few late passengers hurried aboard, apologizing to no one in particular. On the platform, a station supervisor glanced at his watch. Everything was proceeding normally. No delays reported anywhere along the line. No maintenance alerts. No unusual activity on the network. He marked the train as ready. Inside the cars, the atmosphere settled into a familiar stillness. Conversations ended. Screens lit up. The gentle sway of the train, barely perceptible, lulled passengers into the illusion that movement had already begun. An announcement crackled through the speakers. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the 8:17 service. Please ensure all doors are clear. We will be departing shortly." No one listened closely. They never did. The words were background noise, part of the architecture of travel, as invisible as the rails beneath them. At exactly 08:17, the signal ahead changed. Green. The driver acknowledged it with a reflexive motion, hand moving across the console without conscious thought. Power flowed into the system. The train shuddered once, then began to roll forward. Metal wheels met steel rails, producing a sound so familiar it barely registered. A gentle acceleration, a gradual pull. The platform began to slide past the windows. People stood and waved goodbye to no one in particular. A woman adjusted her scarf. A man checked his watch and nodded, satisfied that the day was proceeding on schedule. Outside, the station receded into the distance. For the first several minutes, the journey was indistinguishable from every journey that had come before it. The train passed through suburban stretches where houses lined the tracks like silent witnesses. Laundry hung in backyards. Dogs barked at nothing. Cars paused at crossings as the train swept by, their drivers watching with mild impatience. Signals flashed green as the train approached, then slipped back to red behind it. Everything functioned exactly as designed. In the control center miles away, operators monitored screens filled with blinking indicators. Train IDs moved steadily along digital representations of the track. The icon representing this train advanced without hesitation, just another data point in a sea of routine. No alarms sounded. No warnings appeared. Inside the cars, time unfolded gently. The mother's child stirred and opened his eyes. Two students debated weekend plans. An elderly man gazed out the window, counting familiar landmarks as they passed. None of them noticed the moment they crossed the invisible threshold, the point beyond which this journey would no longer obey the rules it always had. The weather remained perfect. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes drifting lazily in the air. There was no turbulence, no sudden braking, no sensation of danger creeping in. Even the most sensitive passenger would have felt nothing but calm. The route curved gently as the train approached the hills. Trees grew denser here, their shadows flickering across the interior like a slow heartbeat. Ahead lay the tunnel, one of several along the line, unremarkable and well-maintained. The driver had passed through it thousands of times. He adjusted his posture, eyes scanning the displays, speed steady, systems normal. The tunnel signal showed green, granting clear passage. He barely registered the moment the train entered. Outside, daylight vanished in an instant, replaced by artificial lighting racing past the windows. The sound changed subtly, the echo of motion enclosed by concrete walls. Passengers felt the familiar pressure shift in their ears. A few glanced up from their screens. Someone joked softly about tunnels always feeling longer than they really were. No one was afraid. Halfway through the tunnel, the train transmitted a routine status update. Speed, location, all systems operational. The signal was received, and then nothing followed it. But that belongs to another scene. For now, the departure was complete. The train had left the station on time, carrying 300 lives forward along a track that had never once failed them before. It moved with confidence, guided by signals designed to prevent error, supported by systems built on decades of engineering and trust. There was no deviation, no mistake, no hint of what was coming. From the outside, it was the most ordinary departure imaginable, and that was what made it terrifying. Because when something vanishes without chaos, without warning, without even the courtesy of a mistake, it leaves behind a silence that cannot be explained. The station would continue its rhythm long after the train had gone. Other trains would arrive. Other departures would be announced. The day would move forward as if nothing had happened at all. But somewhere between that platform and the destination that never came, certainty had already begun to unravel. The train was gone, and no one knew it yet. The last signal. The tunnel had a name, but no one ever used it. On maps and maintenance records, it appeared as a simple designation, a number, a length, a date of construction. To engineers, it was a solved problem of concrete, ventilation, and lighting. To drivers, it was a brief interruption between stretches of open track. To passengers, it was a momentary darkness, soon forgotten. It had never been a place where things ended. The train entered the tunnel at a steady speed, exactly as planned. Sensors along the entrance registered its arrival, automatically logging time, velocity, and system status. The data streamed into the network without delay, updating screens and control centers dozens of kilometers away. Everything read normal. Inside the control cabin, the driver watched the tunnel lights streak past in perfect rhythm. His hands rested lightly on the console. He felt no vibration beyond the usual hum, no resistance in the controls, no reason to adjust course or speed. This tunnel was straight, short, barely more than a minute from entrance to exit. He had already begun thinking about the next segment of the route. Behind him, in the passenger cars, the darkness shifted moods. Some people looked up instinctively, eyes drawn to the sudden absence of scenery. Reflections replaced landscapes in the glass, faint outlines of faces, the glow of screens, the ghostly overlap of strangers sharing the same space. A child pressed his forehead to the window, watching the lights blur into streaks. A woman checked her phone and frowned when the signal dropped, then shrugged and put it away. Someone coughed, someone laughed softly. Life continued, uninterrupted. At precisely 8:41:32, the train transmitted its routine mid-tunnel status packet, speed constant, power stable, braking systems inactive, location confirmed. The signal was received, logged, and archived in the system without comment. To the network, it was one more heartbeat in a day filled with thousands of them. That transmission would become the last confirmed evidence the train ever existed beyond the station. Seconds passed, then more seconds. At the tunnel exit, the next sensor waited and waited. Normally, the transition was seamless. The train would emerge, light flooding the windows once more, sensors clicking to life as it passed, updating the system with reassuring precision. Operators rarely even noticed. The process was automatic, invisible. But this time, the sensor at the exit remained silent. At first, no one noticed. Delays of a few seconds were common. Variations in speed, momentary network lag, minor fluctuations in data flow, all within acceptable parameters. The system did not flag an alert. There was no reason to. Inside the tunnel, however, something had changed. Passengers felt it before they understood it. The lights did not flicker. The train did not slow. There was no jolt, no screech of metal, no sudden darkness. Yet a subtle pressure seemed to settle over the cars, as if the air itself had thickened. Conversation faltered. A man looked up from his book, suddenly uncertain why. A woman felt a brief wave of nausea, sharp and inexplicable, then gone. A child stopped tapping his feet against the seat and leaned closer to his mother. The tunnel felt longer. Not physically. The train continued at the same speed, but perceptually. The lights seemed farther apart. The rhythm of motion lost its familiar cadence. What should have been a brief passage stretched quietly into something else. In the control cabin, the driver frowned, not at the instruments, they still read normal, but at a sensation he could not quite place, a subtle dissonance, like hearing a note played slightly off-key. He adjusted his grip on the controls and glanced at the clock. The tunnel should have ended by now. He opened his mouth to speak into the radio, then hesitated. There was no protocol for something feels wrong. Systems did not recognize intuition, and yet his eyes flicked back to the displays, searching for confirmation that his unease was unfounded. Speed steady, power stable, signal strength nominal. Everything insisted that nothing was happening. The exit light appeared ahead, or something that resembled it. A pale shape in the distance, smaller than it should have been, strangely muted. The driver leaned forward slightly, squinting. Then the shape wavered, not flickering like a failing bulb, but shifting, as if seen through heat or water. The walls of the tunnel seemed to ripple at the edges of vision, their straight lines bending imperceptibly. Passengers began to notice the silence, not the absence of sound. The train still hummed, the rails still sang beneath the wheels, but the absence of variation. The echo that usually accompanied tunnels had flattened, as though the sound had nowhere to go. A man tapped his phone again, frowning when it remained dead. He held it up, turning it slightly, as if angle alone might summon a signal. "Is it supposed to take this long?" someone whispered. No one answered. At 8:41:47, the control center registered the first anomaly. The train's icon on the digital map had stopped moving. Not vanished, not flagged, simply frozen, hovering at a point within the tunnel. At first, the operator assumed a display lag and refreshed the screen. The icon did not move. He checked the data feed. The last received packet timestamp blinked back at him. 15 seconds ago, still within acceptable delay, still not alarming. He made a note and continued monitoring. Inside the tunnel, the exit light grew no closer. The driver felt a sudden, sharp clarity, the kind that arrives just before panic, when the mind strips away distraction and focuses on one undeniable truth. They were not progressing. He eased off the throttle, expecting the familiar sensation of deceleration. The instruments responded, registering the change, but his body felt nothing. The train did not slow. He pulled back further. Nothing. A murmur rippled through the passenger cars as people sensed the shift in tension. Someone laughed nervously, then stopped. A woman tightened her grip on her bag. The child near the window began to cry, a thin, confused sound. The tunnel lights dimmed, not uniformly but unevenly, as though distance itself were distorting illumination. Some lights seemed closer than others, their reflections smearing across the windows. The driver reached for the emergency brake. Before his hand made contact, the displays went blank. Not dark, blank, white, featureless, like erased chalkboards. The hum of the train deepened, vibrating through the floor and seats, no longer tied to any recognizable motion. In the control center, alarms finally sounded. The train's signal had dropped entirely, not degraded, not corrupted, gone. Operators stared at their screens as the data stream flatlined. Attempts to reestablish communication returned nothing. No error codes, no partial responses. It was as if the train had been physically unplugged from reality. Protocols were activated. Adjacent traffic was halted. Emergency response teams were alerted. Engineers began running diagnostics, searching for any explanation that fit within known failure models. But none did. A train could derail. It could lose power. It could crash, burn, break apart. It could not simply stop existing between 2 points on the same stretch of track. Inside the tunnel, fear had taken hold. Passengers stood, despite the lack of instruction, bracing themselves against seats and poles. Voices overlapped, questions tumbling out faster than answers could form. What's happening? Why aren't we stopping? Is this normal? The driver tried the radio. Control. This is... His voice vanished into silence. Not static, not interference, silence. The tunnel walls were no longer clearly defined. They seemed to recede, stretching away from the train, their texture smoothing into something less solid, less certain. The exit light flickered, then split, becoming 2 faint glows drifting apart. Time lost coherence. Some passengers would later, if later could even be said to exist, describe the sensation as falling without moving. Others would say it felt like being held in place while the world slid away. Many could never find words at all. The child stopped crying. Everyone did. Not because fear subsided, but because sound itself seemed to resist them. Voices emerged muted, swallowed immediately, as though the air no longer carried vibration the way it once had. The last physical sensation most of them remembered was pressure, gentle but insistent, like hands placed against every surface of their bodies at once. Then even that faded. At 08:42, the system logged the train as missing. Not delayed, not disabled, missing. The tunnel remained. Inspection teams would later find it intact, uncollapsed, unchanged. The rails ran straight and true from entrance to exit. Power flowed normally. Sensors functioned flawlessly. There was no scorch mark, no debris, no indication that 300 people had passed through and vanished between 2 points less than a kilometer apart. The last signal, that ordinary, forgettable transmission, would be replayed countless times in the months and years that followed. Engineers slowed it down, isolated frequencies, searched for hidden anomalies buried in the data. They found none. It said only what it was supposed to say, that everything was fine. And then, nothing ever spoke again. Aftermath. The tunnel was silent when they entered it. Not the ordinary quiet of an unused space, but a stillness so complete it felt deliberate. The inspection team moved slowly, boots crunching softly against gravel that had not been disturbed since the morning train schedules resumed around the absence it left behind. Lights swept across concrete walls. Nothing was wrong. The rails lay perfectly aligned, their steel surfaces unwarped, unscarred. Overhead lines hummed with steady power. Emergency phones mounted along the tunnel walls blinked patiently, awaiting calls that would never come. Even the dust sat undisturbed, as though no force had passed through to scatter it. And yet, something had. The first team walked the entire length of the tunnel twice. Then again. They measured distances, checked tolerances, tested sensors. Every reading fell within normal limits. When they emerged at the far end, they did so reluctantly, as if expecting to feel resistance, as if the tunnel might refuse to let them leave. It did not. Outside, the world waited. By then, news had begun to leak. Not details, there were none, but whispers. A train overdue, communications lost, a route suspended pending investigation. The public imagination filled the vacuum faster than any official statement could. Authorities established a perimeter. Rail traffic along the line was halted indefinitely. Buses replaced trains, their drivers fielding the same question at every stop. What happened? No one had an answer. In the control center, the frozen icon remained on the screen long after the system should have cleared it. Engineers argued over whether to remove it manually. Some insisted it should stay, a marker, a reminder, a question left unresolved. In the end, it vanished with a routine system reset. That disappearance unsettled more people than they cared to admit. Search operations escalated quickly. Drones scanned nearby terrain. Helicopters traced the route from above, their rotors beating against an empty sky. Teams combed forests, ravines, waterways, any place where wreckage might plausibly hide. They found nothing. No twisted metal, no fragments of paint, no scorched earth or disturbed soil. It was as if the train had never left the station at all. Families gathered at information centers, clutching phones, photographs, hope. They watched officials step to podiums and speak carefully chosen words. Unprecedented, under investigation, no evidence at this time. Time stretched painfully. Hours turned into days, days into weeks. The absence did not behave like a normal disaster. There were no remains to mourn, no site to visit, no clear moment of loss to anchor grief. Loved ones were suspended between states, unable to accept death, unable to expect return. Some refused to leave their phones, convinced a call would come. Others stared at maps, tracing the route again and again, searching for a point where logic might have slipped. Psychologists would later describe it as ambiguous loss, the most corrosive kind. A wound that never closes because it never fully opens. Rumors spread. Some claimed the train had been secretly rerouted, its passengers detained for reasons the public could not be allowed to know. Others whispered about experimental technology, classified tunnels, hidden infrastructure buried beneath the official maps. A few spoke more quietly, using words like tier and threshold and elsewhere. Authorities denied everything. They had to. An accident could be explained. A failure could be fixed. Even a cover-up could be rationalized. But not a vanishing. The tunnel was sealed for further testing. Independent experts were brought in. International teams reviewed data logs, signal recordings, maintenance histories stretching back decades. Nothing unusual surfaced. The last signal, that brief, mundane transmission, became the focal point of obsession. It was played back in labs, dissected frame by frame, frequency by frequency. Some thought they detected anomalies at the edges of the waveform. Others dismissed them as artifacts of overanalysis. The official conclusion remained unchanged, no cause determined. The rail line eventually reopened. The decision sparked outrage. How can trains run through a place where a train disappeared? Critics demanded. Engineers countered with data. Thousands of test runs. Empty trains passed through the tunnel without incident. Sensors performed flawlessly. There was no measurable risk. And yet, passengers noticed things. The tunnel felt colder, longer. The echo wrong. Some reported a brief pressure in their ears. Others described a sensation of being watched, not by eyes, but by space itself. Complaints flooded in, vague and inconsistent, impossible to quantify. Ridership dropped. Drivers requested reassignment. Some refused outright to operate trains through that section of track. Officially, their concerns were logged and dismissed. Unofficially, schedules were adjusted to accommodate them. The tunnel acquired a reputation, not a haunted one. There were no stories of ghosts or voices, but something more unsettling. A place where absence had weight, where the idea of passage felt conditional. At night, maintenance crews reported equipment malfunctions, tools misplaced, then found exactly where they had been set down, radios cutting out for seconds at a time, lights dimming without explanation. Nothing dramatic enough to justify closure, nothing small enough to ignore. Years passed. Legal battles followed predictable paths. Insurance companies argued over definitions. Courts wrestled with the concept of loss without proof of destruction. Death certificates were delayed, then issued reluctantly, their language carefully hedged, presumed. Memorials were built without remains. Names etched into stone stood where no bodies lay. Families gathered on anniversaries, leaving flowers that wilted beneath unanswered skies. Speeches spoke of remembrance, of lives interrupted, of journeys unfinished. No one spoke of conclusions. Occasionally, someone would claim to have seen something. A man swore he heard a train horn echo from underground while walking near the tunnel late at night. A sound out of place and time. A woman insisted her phone briefly connected to an unfamiliar network while passing through, displaying notifications she could not open. These stories were dismissed, filed away as artifacts of trauma and imagination. And yet, the stories persisted. Researchers proposed theories they could never publish, mathematical models suggesting rare spatial anomalies, hypotheses involving time dilation, signal displacement, topological faults. Each theory explained part of the mystery. None explained the whole. The most unsettling fact remained unchanged. The tunnel still existed, connecting 2 points on the map exactly as it always had. Trains still passed through it every day. But no one could say with certainty that it was the same tunnel the missing train had entered. Some nights, control center operators reported seeing the frozen icon again, just for a moment, hovering where the train had vanished. Each time, system diagnostics showed nothing. Screenshots revealed empty maps. They stopped reporting it. The aftermath did not end. It settled. It became part of the background noise of the world. A story occasionally resurfacing in documentaries, podcasts, late-night conversations. Listeners shook their heads, fascinated but distant, comforted by the belief that such things belonged to the past. But the rails remained empty where a train should have been. And every time a departure board flipped from on time to arrived, someone, somewhere wondered about the journeys that never complete, the ones that slip between data points and leave no debris behind. Because disasters usually leave scars. This one left a gap, a clean, precise absence where certainty used to live. And the world, uneasy but pragmatic, learned to step around it, careful not to look too long into the space where 300 lives had simply stopped being accounted for. Closing. The tracks still end where they always have. Steel meets steel, concrete meets gravel. Schedules resolve into arrivals, delays, or cancellations. The system continues, efficient and indifferent, as if nothing ever challenged its assumptions. And yet, the question remains. Somewhere along that ordinary route, between a departure recorded to the second and an arrival that never came, certainty slipped its boundaries. Not violently, not dramatically. It did not announce itself with fire or collapse or noise. It simply stopped answering. Investigators spent years searching for the moment where logic failed. They measured, recalculated, simulated. They rebuilt the journey in controlled environments, replacing passengers with sensors, intuition with numbers. Every test returned the same conclusion. The route was sound. The tunnel was stable. The system behaved exactly as designed, which left only one possibility no one wanted to name: that the design itself might be incomplete. We like to believe that disappearance requires destruction, that for something to be gone, it must first be broken. But the train offered no such comfort. It did not crash. It did not derail. It did not leave behind evidence to argue with. It simply ceased to be reachable. 300 lives did not end in a way that could be circled on a map. They did not become a site, a wreck, a headline with images attached. They became an absence, one that could not be excavated or buried, and absences are harder to live with than ruins. For the families, grief arrived without permission and without shape. There was no final phone call to replay, no last known moment to hold on to, only a mourning that began normally and never finished. Some kept rooms untouched for years. Some celebrated birthdays that felt increasingly fictional. Some stopped talking about it altogether, not because the pain faded, but because language failed. How do you mourn something that never confirms its own ending? The world, meanwhile, moved on, because it always does. New routes opened, new trains were commissioned, the missing journey became a case study, then a footnote, then a story told late at night when the conversation drifted toward the strange and unresolved. And still, the tracks remained. Every system depends on trust, not just in machinery, but in continuity, in the idea that causes produce effects, that departures imply arrivals, that space behaves today as it did yesterday. The train challenged that trust, not loudly, not enough to shut everything down, just enough to remind us how thin the framework really is. Some engineers privately admitted that what disturbed them most was not the disappearance itself, but its precision, the clean cut, the lack of collateral damage. Whatever happened did not struggle, it did not misfire, it did not leave a mess. It behaved as though it knew exactly what it was doing. Others rejected that idea outright. Assigning intention to the unknown felt dangerous, a step toward superstition. And yet, even they avoided the tunnel when they could, choosing longer routes without fully explaining why. Rationality, it turns out, has limits. Every culture has stories about places where the world behaves differently. Crossroads, doorways, narrow passages where one state becomes another. For most of history, we treated them as myths, metaphors for uncertainty, not literal threats. But modern systems are built on the assumption that such places do not exist. The train suggested otherwise. It reminded us that maps are agreements, not guarantees, that signals confirm only what they are designed to detect. That silence is not the same as safety. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is not that the train was destroyed or displaced, but that it continued. That somewhere, in some state we cannot measure, a journey still unfolds. That motion did not stop, only diverged. That 300 people did not vanish, but passed beyond the edge of what our instruments define as here. If that is true, then the tunnel did not end the journey. It redirected it. And if that can happen once, without warning, without failure, then it can happen again. The world prefers endings. We crave conclusions, even tragic ones, because they allow us to close the loop. To say this happened, therefore that followed. The train denied us that structure. It left us with a sentence that never reaches its period. So the closing words remain the same, no matter how many years pass. The tracks end, but the question never did. Because somewhere between departure and destination lies a space we do not fully understand. A place where systems fall silent, where certainty thins, and where the most ordinary journeys can slip quietly beyond our reach. And every time a train pulls away from a platform exactly on time, we trust that it will arrive, not because we can prove it will, but because we need to believe that the world still works the way we think it does.
Shadows crawl where the light won't go. A silent wind, it starts to grow.